And now, part 3 of Building Blocks for a Better Life, Lifelong Happiness.
We've been looking at the life of the great King David through the Psalms, not through the regular accounts in Kings and Chronicles. I think the best way to understand David's magnificent life is to look at his inward life, and you can see that through the poems that he wrote. And we looked first at the theme song of David's youth, Psalm 23, and then we looked at the theme song of his recovery after he had committed adultery and murder and disgraced himself, and how he came back from the depths in Psalm 51. Today we're going to look at the theme song of David's older years, from midlife on. We know from the narrative that he consolidated his power. He had some problems with his kids. He tutored Solomon. The Second Chronicles said he died at a good old age, full of days and riches and honor. David found the secret of living happily through the years of maturity, through midlife and beyond. And the secrets are in his great song called Psalms 139. Let's read it together. Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know everything I do. You understand my thoughts from far away. You see me when I'm working or resting. You know all of my actions, even before I speak. You know what I'm going to say. And yet, you protect me anyway, and you care for me. That is beyond my comprehension. It is hard for me to understand. Lord, where can I go to escape from you? If I try to get away from your presence, you are always there. If I go to heaven, you are there. If I lie down with the dead in hell, you are there. If I fly away to the east or the west, you are there. You are always leading me and doing good in my life. I could ask the darkness to hide me. It would do no good. The darkness and the light are all the same to you. Lord, you created every part of me, and you put me together in my mother's womb. I will praise you because you are to be greatly honored. All you do is strange and wonderful. I know it with all my heart. When my bones were being formed carefully, when you were putting me together in my mother's womb, you knew who I was. You knew me before I was born. You knew when I was going to die, and all of the days that had been allotted to me were recorded in your book, even before they began. Oh God, how precious are your thoughts to me. How many of them there are. If I counted them, they would be more than the grains of sand. And yet, when I awaken, you are always still there. The theme song of David's older years. The title of the sermon is The Secrets of a Happy Maturity. I heard a cute story the other day. A minister friend of mine said he was talking with a 97-year-old gentleman. And he said, what in the world is it like to be 97 years old? He said, well, I can't see any more than about 10 feet. He said, and I don't hear very well anymore. He said, my hands are so full of arthritis I can't close them all the way. And he said, when I want to move my right foot, I have to take both my hands and lift my leg up. He said, but thank God I can still drive. I just love that story. I wanted to work it in the sermon somehow, and the only way I knew to work it in is to say that it does point up something about the way we are in America. About the only way we talk of old age is in terms of jokes. Because you see, America is obsessed with youth, and we're terrified of old age. It's not even politically correct talking anymore to say people are old. You have to say they're aging. Well, that doesn't make much sense to me. I mean, you're aging from the time you're conceived, so that doesn't describe the mature years. We're obsessed with youth. We're terrified of old age. How many times this week have you heard something advertised on television as being new? That's the catchword. New means good. It's a synonym for good. And a synonym for bad is old. We're obsessed with youth. We're the only culture in history that not only ignores the wisdom of our elders, we abhor the wisdom of our elders. And the result of that is that there are three black dogs of despair that stalk us all from the time we're at midlife onward. And let me tell you that midlife means from about 35 onwards, okay? If you call 40 midlife, you plan to live to be 80. I call myself on the upper end of middle age. You talking about the upper end, that means I'm going to live to be 110, sure. But there are three black dogs of despair, three feelings which sink us from midlife onward because of this obsession with youth that we have. One is the feeling of worthlessness. When people reach a certain age in our country, they're made to feel, I'm no longer of value. I'm no longer worthy. I'm no longer where I need to be and who I need to be. And there are a bunch of us running around doing crazy things because we think we're basically worthless. The second feeling of despair is the feeling of failure. None of us accomplishes at 40 what we dreamed of doing at 20. And when we get to be 40 years old, we say, I'm a failure. I could have done better. Doesn't matter how good I did. The whole society and mom and dad from the very time I was small were saying, Jerry, you could have done better. Feeling of failure. And the third feeling we have is the feeling of being finished, washed up, over the hill. I was wondering where we got this term washed up. It means dead things that can no longer live in the ocean, so they get washed up, finished. And these are the three feelings that haunt us. The amazing thing about David is that in his mature years, from midlife onward, he avoided all three of these black dogs of despair. How did he do that? How did he avoid the feeling of worthlessness and failure and being washed up? The secrets are in that 139th Psalm. I invite you to take it home and read it. It ought to be the theme song of every one of us who is over 30. What were the secrets? Well, first, he avoided the feeling of worthlessness by getting to know what I call the graciousness of God. I know that's a preacher word. The graciousness of God. Read verses 1 through 6. Basically, he says, God, you have searched me, and you know everything there is to know about me. You know all those little thoughts that are way back in the corridors of my mind that I don't let anybody know I'm thinking. You know the dirty stuff and the bad stuff and the good stuff and the great stuff. You know everything there is to know about me, God, and you still think I'm somebody. That just blows my mind. Now, that's a loose translation. He says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain unto it. God, that blows my mind. You know me, and yet you still think I'm somebody. Point. The only way to defeat the feeling of worthlessness when you reach midlife and beyond is to have an inner voice of God's graciousness saying, you are somebody. You are valuable to me. You are not worthless. You're a creature that I created. My grandmother used to tell me, don't let young people tell you who you are when you get to be old, because they're scared to death they'll get to be as old as you are. She said, the only way to keep your balance in old age is to let God tell you who you are. There's a story out of Martin Luther's life. He and a childhood friend were going around one Christmas Eve doing Christmas carols, and they came to this big house, and they were singing Christmas carols to the top of their lungs, and a lamp came on inside, and the door opened, and there was this huge, looming hulk of a man. And he had a club in his hand. And they turned and ran, and he started chasing them, and he said, wait, stop. And they turned down an alley, and it was a blind alley, and they were trapped. And Luther said as he covered his head to ward off the blows, out of the side of his eye, he saw that the man wasn't carrying a club, he was carrying a huge sausage. And he said, I understood later in life that all my life I had been trained to think of God as a big looming creature who was chasing me to beat me with a sausage. But all along, with a club, and all along he's been, I'll get it straight. All along he's been saying to me, stop, wait. It's not a club, it's a sausage. The only way I know to combat the feeling of worthlessness as we move into the middle years and beyond is to know the graciousness of God. He knows us as we are, and yet he still thinks we're somebody. Now let's look at the second thing. The way that David avoided the feeling of failure. was that he got in touch with what we call the providence of God. And that's a preacher word. Let's just leave it out here for a little bit. In verses 6 through 12 of Psalm 139, take it home and read it. What David says is, God, I can't get away from you. I can't shake you. If I go to hell, you're there. If I go to heaven, you're there. If I go here, you're there. Even the night won't. I can't shake you, God. And the amazing thing is that every time I run into you in my life, I find that you are using my life for good. Now remember who is saying this. Here was a man who had committed adultery, had his lover's husband murdered, tried to cover it up, disgraced himself and his whole country, and out of the ashes of that great disgrace, he raised a son named Solomon, who was the issue of his lover, Bathsheba. And David was saying, as I look back on my life, I see that even in my darkest sins, God, you were there working good. I think we ought to change the word providence to providence. The providence of God is the providence of God. He is always there to provide goodness. He is working even in the worst of what we've done. There's no way to be a failure if you know that God is working good in what you're doing. There are no failures in the kingdom of God whatsoever. We've gotten some new material on our lineage. My daughter and I were looking up where we came from and our roots. And I came upon some material this last week about my great-grandmother, Rosa Ward Mann. She lived in Holly Springs, Mississippi before the Civil War. She had a sweetheart named Andrew Jackson Mann. She waited for him. He was captured twice and wounded in the Civil War, and he came home. And in 1868, Andrew Jackson Mann married Rosa Ward, my great-grandmother. When they'd just been married a few years, in 1874, he had sold his crop, had 2 little babies, and she was pregnant. And on his way home with his proceeds, he was waylaid by highwaymen and beaten severely, went home, laid down, and died. And Rosa Ward Mann, my great-grandmother, with 2 small children and pregnant with a third, decided that she would pull up stakes and come to Texas. She drove a team of mules and a wagon with all of her belongings and her children from Holly Springs, Mississippi to Mart, Texas. We have the scrap of a letter that she wrote back home to her friend Molly, we don't know Molly who, in Holly Springs, Mississippi. And she was talking about the rigors of the journey. She said, I kept my pistol under my petticoats, and more than once I had to put my hand on it, thinking I would have to defend my life and the life of my children. She said, when we got to the Sabine River and crossed, we broke a wheel on the wagon. And she said, there we were in the late evening, and there was fog and mist, and out of the mist there came this awful, scrubby, huge man. She said, I reached for my pistol. When he came closer, he had a smile on his face. He took us home where his wife and children were and kept us there for 2 days and fixed our wagon. She said, I have now been hemorrhaging for 3 days. We'll probably lose the baby, but I am resolved to go on with my journey. And then she said, and here's the point, I could not go on if God were not so good. She didn't miscarry. The child was my grandfather, Carey Freeman Mann Sr. My father was Carey Freeman Mann Jr., and the name of the man who loomed out of the Sabine mist to help her was named Carey Freeman. I could not go on if God were not so good. The providence of God. The only way I know to defeat the black dog that says, because I'm past midlife, I'm a failure, is to know that God's been in everything, working his goodness. The providence of God. Now let's look at the third one. David avoided the feeling of being washed up, finished, over the hills, by getting in touch with the hope of God. In the last section of that psalm, he says, Lord, you knew me from the very moment I was conceived and was forming up in my mother's womb. You knew who I was. You could see the whole panorama of my life. You know how long I would live. You knew how many days were allotted to me. You knew when I would die. And yet in all of that, every time I awakened, you were still there. When David looked to the end of his life, he realized that because God had been with him in the past and was with him in the present, that God would be with him in the future. He realized that he wasn't washed up because God is the God of the future as much as he is the God of the present and the God of the past. He always had something to look forward to, and that to me is the essence of faith. Our hope is that God is out there waiting for us in the future with open arms. How many of you saw our own member of River Bend, Tom Kite, win the Bob Hope Classic last week? You remember I asked you to pray for him, but my goodness, 35 under par. Did you see it? I saw it, every stroke of it. And I couldn't help but think as he was putting together the 5 greatest rounds of golf in succession that have ever been shot in the PGA Tour. Last week, Jim Murray from the LA Times said it was the equivalent of Secretariat winning the third leg of the Triple Crown by 31 lengths. And all through this, various commentators were saying, people, you are now watching history. Never in history has anybody ever done this. And yet the chief commentator, Johnny Miller, who had a great start in the career and then it faded, kept bringing up that this was an anomaly. This is a quirk. This is not supposed to happen because Tom Kite is 43 years old. And if he said 43 years old once, he must have said it 43 times. And what did you say when Tom came in the booth? Man, you're 43 years old. And it struck me that being washed up is a state of mind. When I was 14 years old, a 32-year-old man named Roger Bannister ran the mile in under 4 minutes, the first person in history. He broke the magic barrier. I was 14. Now, 14-year-olds are running the mile in under 4 minutes because the barrier, the state of mind was broken, and now it can be done. But our hope is not lie in the fact that we can defy the odds. Our hope is that God, when our days are run, will be standing at the finish line with his arms open wide, saying, I love you whether you've done good or not. I love you. Everybody has a crown waiting for him, whether he runs first or whether he runs last, as long as he tries to run by the grace, the hope, the providence of God.
This concludes Dr. Gerald Mann's teaching series, Building Blocks for a Better Life. Dr. Mann's books and audio cassettes are available from Gerald Mann Ministries by calling 1-800-974-HOPE. That's 1-800-974-4673. Or you can write to us at Post Office Box 160-100, Austin, Texas 78716. Thank you for listening.